Welcome to Design for Learning, a podcast from Notre Dame Learning. I'm your host, Jim Lang. Among the most fundamental promises education makes is this: what you learn here on campus will help you when you're out there in the world. Learning researchers use the term transfer to describe this process and make a distinction between near and far transfer. Near transfer happens when a student can apply a skill from a classroom exercise to a test. Far transfer happens when the student can take a skill and apply it in another class, or in an internship, or even in their careers after college. But what does it look like when that far transfer is part of the class itself? Community-based learning, professors embed their courses in real-world contexts, creating partnerships with organizations who have real needs connected to the course material. My guest today has embraced that teaching approach and amplified it to a whole new level with the help of virtual reality technology. On today's episode, she will describe what inspired her to undertake this project, the evolution of it over time, and her focus on making it a valuable experience for both her students and the partners they engage with. Wendy Angst is the Mike and Melanie Newman Director of the Powerful Means Initiative, and she is a professor in the Department of Management and Organization at the University of Notre Dame's Mendoza College of Business. She also serves as the Director of Undergraduate Studies for the Impact Consulting minor, and has been instrumental in shaping experiential learning opportunities that empower students to drive meaningful social impact and grow the good in business. Before transitioning to academia, Wendy was a healthcare entrepreneur, serving as a founding member and later CEO of CapMed, one of the earliest champions of electronic personal health records. She led the company from startup to acquisition, pioneering advancements in consumer-driven healthcare. Welcome to Design for Learning, Wendy.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so I'm curious, we're going to talk about this approach you've taken, this particular course. But when you started teaching initially, coming from the healthcare industry and being an entrepreneur there, did you start like a more standard teaching classroom approach, or did you start with this kind of creative way?
So coming from industry, it really shaped the way that I approach classroom and learning, and really trying to practice what I preach, so to speak, of having empathy for students. And I learn best by, working hands-on and applying what I'm learning. So that's the approach that I really had from the beginning with all of the courses that I taught. And I started off teaching a course that was required for all of the Mendoza students called Business Problem Solving. And in that course, we made it experiential, where we had consulting firms come in every other week, and the students had to work on a problem that represented that type of industry and present back to the firm and get real feedback, and just really gave them exposure to how they would approach problems if they went into that space, and also to discern a bit and build their network at the same time.
And do you find students responded well to that?
Yes, certainly,
Is there a but there, though?
Well, I think some certainly rise to the challenge of, really appreciating that opportunity, but it also makes the stakes a little bit higher, right? If you're actually working with, clients, and you're in a scenario where your project and your recommendation really matter, it just, gives a little bit higher level of importance to the work that you're putting forward, your work product, and that can be stressful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, initially, you were working with like local partners, right? Like you work with people coming in from other places, or were they actually like South Bend community organizations?
Yeah, so Jim, I've done experiential learning in all of the classes that I've taught. So that example I gave was a consulting class. So we, had the benefit of consulting firms coming in from around the U.S., and mostly firms that are recruiting Notre Dame students. And that's typically a junior, senior level course. Beyond that, I've really honed my area of expertise now in the Powerful Means Initiative, and I lead the Impact Consulting minor. And one of the foundational courses with that is called Innovation and Design Thinking. And so with Innovation and Design Thinking, the students work with a project partner. They go through kind of a shorter sprint at the beginning to just make sure that they are aware of the techniques and practices that they'll be employing to approach problem solving in this way. But then they began working with a project partner. And when I first began this course, we worked with La Casa de Amistad, the YWCA, the Boys and Girls Club, so a lot of local partners. And then in 2020, I had the opportunity to begin working with a girls' school in northern Uganda that was a part of the Archdiocese of Gulu. And so that really gave us the opportunity for taking this immersion internationally. But with that, obviously, comes some of the challenges around, not being able to have students be on the ground and sitting face to face and building empathy with the constituents of the problem. So we had to be really creative in how we were, enabling students to build that connectivity with the project partners. So one of the first things that we did with the school in Uganda, and again, this was in collaboration with the Archdiocese of Gulu, but we structured a partnership between the university and the Archdiocese, and we installed a computer lab and internet, which there's a whole host of, complex things that come into play when you're trying to do that in northern Uganda, where people, do not have access to running water or indoor plumbing. But we were able to get this computer lab set up, and that was our first foray into enabling Notre Dame students to have this kind of ongoing dialogue and collaboration with our partners in Uganda.
Okay, so these partnerships, they started off as part of this innovation design and thinking. Is it innovation and design thinking it's called?
Innovation and design thinking.
Thinking course,
yeah.
okay, yeah. And so that's kind of how this partnership started. And you said 2020. That was pandemic year.
It sure was.
So how did that affect what you were doing here?
It was the case that the project began, and we were looking at this as a one-semester project. And so our design thinking prompts typically are meant to be very open-ended, right? That it's collaborative. You may or may not come up with a solution, but the foundation is that it's grounded in empathy, and you work collaboratively with the stakeholders. So our project prompt out of the gate was, how do we reimagine vocational education in northern Uganda? And this was coming from the fact that there was a girls' school that had been created in 2007 by the Archdiocese of Gulu in conjunction with a group of Italian missionaries. And the school was designed for these young women that had been abducted by the LRA conflict and were returning home after being held in captivity, and many of them had children, but they had lost out on years of education and their lives, and were just trying to figure out how to build a better future. So the school was on the verge of closing, and, without having been there, our initial hypothesis was, how do we help the school just ensure that people are recognizing the value of these girls getting an education, and, make sure that we can be creative in finding ways that the school can sustain itself. So we had an opportunity to travel with 10 students over spring break, and that's right at the time when people were starting to talk about COVID, and is it a thing? Is it not a thing? Should you go? But I really relied and put my trust in God and in Notre Dame Global. And Notre Dame Global, does such a great job. But they said, we're monitoring everything on the ground. We will, let you know if we think it's not safe to travel. But if you want to cancel the trip at any time, by all means. The whole time my husband was saying, cancel the trip, if you get stuck in Uganda. But off we went. And so while we were actually in Uganda is when we received notice that the university would be, going remote at that time.
Wow.
But honestly, it ended up being such a blessing to be there, for the students to see firsthand really, what life is like on the ground. And, you can't help in a class like this to come up with ideas. I'll never forget one of them was borrowed from one of the meal boxes that people would get in the mail here. And they're saying, oh, well, how great would that be? Since there's food scarcity issues, we'll have meal boxes delivered to people's houses. And, you get on the ground and transportation, roads, a box, let alone food that could be in a meal and then it's cooked over charcoal. They're just things that, to really immerse yourself and try and, understand the perspective of another requires either being on the ground or some other, ingenuity, similar to some of the VR experiences that we've been fortunate to build out with the Office of Digital Learning here.
And that gets to the heart of the issue. I mean, you can sort of think about these things in a sort of abstract way in the classroom and even create cases. But the filling out the rich details of a case, in the classroom is different from actually seeing it in the actual context of the place, right? Exactly. They're sort of encountering that in the real, in the village itself, right? Yeah. And so then you want to sort of take that experience and try to amplify it or extend it in the virtual reality stuff. So tell me how that happened, how the virtual reality stuff now is being used in the course, and what's that been like?
Yeah, So again, we really learned from the value of being on the ground, and I think it's not surprising, I'm sure, to anyone that certainly you can learn at a different level if you're able to be there, walking hand in hand with the partners that you're working with on some of the challenges that are presented. But it's certainly not scalable to be able to take 70 students to Uganda in a given semester. So we were really fortunate when Office of Digital Learning put out a call looking for proposals to help support doing some 360-degree VR experiences. And so we had a phenomenal team that went on the ground and was able to capture footage of not just inside the grounds of the school, outside of the gates of the school, going into town and looking at what the markets are like, interviewing some of the locals around what they do for work and how they farm and just some of the challenges they face. And so when the students put on these headsets, I don't know how many of the listeners will have, been through a 360 VR, but you can hear a noise over your shoulder and actually turn your head and look behind you and see a child playing in the street,
Wow.
right? It's really immersive. And so we were able to roll that out, just over the past 18 months. And the feedback from the students has been phenomenal. Like, it just gives them such a different perspective on what the actual situation is for what they're dealing with when they're trying to support these young women and thinking about collaborative ways they can, build businesses and meet needs in their community through this educational experience. So the feedback has been off the charts.
So when does the experience, like the VR experience, happen in the course itself? Like, what's the structure of it? Like where would it happen in the semester, for example?
Yeah, so typically what happens is, again, we'll begin the course with a smaller design thinking project, and all of our projects go through a similar cadence around how do you first build empathy and really, understand and define the unmet needs that exist before ideating, prototyping ideas, and building a solution. So we'll go through that as a sprint for the first few weeks, and then after that, we'll begin getting the students engaged on the project. And as I mentioned, we began working with the St. Bakhita's Vocational Training Center in 2020, but it really captured our hearts and, just the opportunity that we have to engage students in such meaningful work that we've continued to work with St. Bakhita's for the past 5 years. So what typically happens in the course of the semester is after that sprint, we'll begin helping students go through the empathy stage of, trying to get acclimated to the school and the surroundings. So they will go through the VR pretty early in the process so that they have a sense for what life is like there. And then shortly after that, they'll begin going through a round of ethnographic interviews with the students themselves, alumni, and also doing some expert interviews to try and get a more robust view of life on the ground in Uganda.
So then after that, the students design a project. And so what are the projects like?
Yeah, so it's ranged. So I would say Uganda was closed longer than any other school system in the world during COVID. So we did not actually reopen the school until November of 2021. And during that time, we supported the school to, again, install that computer lab and the internet and hand washing stations and just some things to just help get the school operational. And then we were very fortunate to receive some financial support from a benefactor to provide a work-study scholarship for the girls to be at the school. So our first 2 years, we were really focused on working with our Notre Dame students here to design businesses that could help the school self-sustain. So we launched, our first big project was launching, we called it Innovation Acres, but we planted 22,000 trees that were a mixture of fruit trees and trees that you could turn into a more sustainable charcoal product, since over 85% of Ugandans cook with charcoal. The next year, we kind of set it up that the students would come up with ideas, and then we'd kind of pick which ones got funded or how much funding they were allocated based on what the next stage of the project was. But we've launched a peanut butter business and a chicken business, and we've opened a restaurant. We've done a hairdressing business, and then one of the businesses that I'm most proud of is we launched an early childhood development center that our architecture students here actually took it on as a class project. They traveled to Uganda, helped design the center, and then we were able to build it. And we have 48 little children now enrolled at our early childhood development center. So for the young women that are studying at our school, again, most of them would have only been able to afford to go to school up until around a 4th grade level. So this is an opportunity for them to come in and learn a skill. So they live at the school for 1 year and learn the vocation. And if they have a child that's 2 or under, we let them bring the child with them, and then the child, attends the ECDC for free. So to answer your question, first 2 years were really around the businesses that we launched. And now last year and this year, we've focused more on our second goal with the project, which is ensuring that the young women at our school have the opportunity and support to thrive. So the students this semester are working with the girls to help them go out in their community and identify unmet needs. Most of the girls, the exposure they have to seeing businesses is really just seeing somebody sitting in the, town circle with a foot-powered sewing machine waiting for someone to need something to be sewn. So there's that's what young women would see for, something to aspire to be independent. And so we're really trying to work with the girls to say, well, what are some other things? What's the future of Uganda look like that you can start thinking about other, skills and careers that you could develop? So they work with the girls to help define these unmet needs and come up with kind of business plan ideas that they could do outside of the gate and then support going forward. And then we have a new level of this project that we're calling our Powerful Means Impact Fund and Incubator, where we have a small pool of capital that we're letting students help direct zero interest microloans and startup kits that we're deploying to women to help them launch their businesses. So we'll have a group of students traveling to Uganda again this January, meeting with the girls, working with them on getting their businesses set up, and then continuing to engage with them after they leave to ensure that they have the resources and support they need to be as successful as possible in launching their business.
So some set of students actually go to Uganda. Not everyone does that, but
that is correct. Every year, I would say we take somewhere between 20 to 30 students to Uganda.
Out of how many in the class?
Oh, gosh. This year we have 90 students enrolled in the fall, and in the spring we'll have another 30, so 120 kids.
Yeah, so I mean, still like 3/4 of the students are not going.
That is correct.
And for those students, the VR stuff is really helping them get grounded and have that kind of empathy that you're looking for, right?
Yeah, very much so. And what was really fun this year, so the students, as I mentioned, as you go through this minor, you begin with the Designing Your Life class and Innovation and Design, and then the immersion where you're in country. And then you come back and Applied Impact, you really focus on building these ideas that you've been working on. So you engage, with the project partner over multiple semesters. But we had students in this Applied Impact class this semester attend the VR experience. And I'm not kidding, 2 of the girls started crying just because it reminded them of being on the ground in Uganda and just, the beautiful experience they had connecting with the people there. So yes, it very much gives exposure, helps people, see and experience what they don't have an opportunity to be on the ground to see at this stage. But it also is a good reminder for the students that have had a chance to be there of just the importance of this work and just, the beauty of the people there that we're partnering with.
Yeah. Initially, actually, how do you identify St. Bakita's as a place to work with? Like, was that something that came from your own background?
Well, funny enough, it in the sense that it came from my own background, I would say that I had always been a big goal setter. And when I was in my 20s, I was just talking about this morning, but when I was in my 20s, I had stated a goal that by the time I'm in my 50s, I either would like to step out of work and be a professor or run a nonprofit for women and girls. So I was like, of course, only Notre Dame can bring both of those things together. But honestly, I heard about the school when I was attending a meeting as a Pulte Fellow back in 2020, and they were talking about some projects that were happening in Africa, and that's obviously an area of the world that we're really committed to supporting. And when I learned about the school, again, our plan was that we were going to make a recommendation and leave it with them, just like you typically do in a given semester. And it wasn't until we had a chance to be there, have that experience, that we realized that we needed to kind of restructure the way that experiential course worked and move from beyond just making a recommendation to continuing to walk with the partners to ensure that they had the support that they needed for implementing.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about the logistical stuff here, some challenges that you might face when you're doing something like that. So I've actually done community engaged learning also for my own discipline, work with local partners and I saw amazing benefits. I loved it. It's a lot of work, though, for you, obviously, and for the students, too. Sort of, where does it go wrong? Where do you feel the most challenging parts are for you and for the students?
How many hours do we have? No, it's as you know, it's a really incredible opportunity and a gift to be able to, to connect those dots. And I would say the students are so appreciative and hungry for having this type of work where they're applying what they're learning beyond the classroom. So to me, that's, one of the brightest spots of doing this work, aside from, being of service to our partners. But with that said, we used to have a tagline when we were first starting this work that said, "Not all credit hours are created equal," until the students were like, that kind of freaked me out. Like, does that mean it's a lot more work? And I'm like, kind of, but we meant it more from the sense of, as you're teaching a 3-credit class, and whether you're teaching accounting 101 or you're teaching a class where you're, working with a project partner and trying to coordinate, conversations over Zoom in Uganda, it still counts as 3 credits,
Right, right.
But yeah, so I would say, some of the challenges that we've had, and these are things that continue to happen on a daily basis, but, certainly where our partner is located, we were just working on some, remote tutoring this weekend, and the tutors weren't showing up. So I, called the person managing the computer lab, and they're like, well, it's raining. Like we're not able to get a connection. And things that you just, really wouldn't think about is a challenge. And
I'm having flashbacks from my own experiences right now.
Yeah. So there's those things that you just can't expect, right? But, it's the onus is on us as the instructors to constantly remind the students, like, this is real world. Like, these things, you think that things will go according to plan, and you have so much time set up for doing this work or doing this interview, and then, something happens and there's a delay, or you are getting kicked off the Zoom over and over again. Certainly in Uganda as well, we deal with the language barriers, and, while everyone receives some level of training in English, our students do not speak Acholi. It's not one of our offered language programs here.
Right.
So that certainly can be a challenge. And, so we're, doing little, workshops with the students around how do you draw stick figures and communicate things, through pictures to help, supplement what you're, verbally trying to communicate, to ensure that the messages are being heard as intended. But yeah, so I would say, it's just the unpredictability around the stability of connections and the challenges that, that can happen. There's just, part of reality, though, right? It's what you would deal with when you're in the real world working. So
are there certain students that's even more challenging for example, like certain students maybe struggle more in this kind of format than others?
Yeah, I would say so, because it can be interesting that you can have, a team of students engaged in a Zoom call, and some can get off and just say, this was, they'll do a reflection and say, this was like such an amazing experience. I called my parents as soon as I walked out to tell them like how incredible this was. And then you can have other students that say like, that was really hard and it was frustrating, right? And they,
right.
So I do think that there's obviously not a one size fits all. And that's, part of us with our focus on launching this impact consulting minors. We don't, want to assume that every student wants to be engaged in this type of work. There's a lot of important vocations out there that students are discerning, and there's not one right fit. So we're trying to find pathways for those students that want to do this type of work, that they can, get on that road.
And again, there's like another big topic, but I know probably the students are working in teams, right? That brings its own problems as well, right?
Yep.
Again, this is a very common thing to do in this form of teaching. And so like, what are the big challenges you see there?
Oh, gosh. Well, I would say just in general, it's always complex working in teams, whether you're a student or you're in the workforce, right?
Yeah.
We do, in every class that I teach, we have the students go through and complete a team charter where they, state up front, like, here's the goals that we're working towards, and here are the things that I need to put on the table that might be complicating my ability to, show up or operate effectively. And so if you're a student who needs to work part-time, or if you are a student who's an athlete, or you have, a triple major, which some of our students do, right? Like, you just are being really transparent around what you're working with and getting that set up front. And then the team also, I have them agree to how they deal with that type of conflict and when they, address it and work through it. So but all of those things, obviously, still exist. And I think, obviously, with how busy people are these days, just finding time to meet, right, can be really, really complicating for the students.
I think also for like teaching purposes, like finding ways to hold students accountable individually as well as the team as well. So there must be some level of that as well. The students' individual kind of like, sort of, I guess, work or project component, I guess.
Yeah, and it kind of varies based on which class. Again, I do community-based learning or experiential learning in every class that I teach. So it varies based on what it is. But for example, right now in in my course, Designing Your Life to Serve as a Powerful Means, the students are working on a team project applying these course concepts to some population that they think could benefit from going through this type of curriculum. But the students all had their own individual interviews that they needed to do and to bring that back. And then they'll all have their own reflections to do. And, there's pieces of that we kind of tease out so that you're being measured on your own individual contributions. And then if you aren't fully contributing in an effective way, that it doesn't impact the overall grade of the team.
Yeah. Okay. So, you started this 5 years ago. Sounds like 5 years. Yeah. Okay. So, what have you learned? What's the major things you've learned over the course of these 5 years? I mean, you sound like you came in and you it was a great project from the start, but probably has evolved in some ways in your own thinking about this. So, what would you say is sort of your major things, your major lessons for yourself about education, about our students, about whatever it might be? Think are your big sort of takeaways from this experience from 5 years in.
Yeah. Well, so I would say, the innovation and design thinking class I've been teaching for over a decade. It's just the first 5 years we're with more local partners. And so, again, a lot of the things that we talked about and that, I know you're very familiar with as well, right? There's just some challenges that exist when you're trying to set up project partners and make sure that you are providing a really enriching academic experience that meets the objectives of the course for students.
Right.
But also meeting the needs of the partner, right, in a way that that's effective and not, demanding too much of them, but yet, having them fully engage in a way that is mutually beneficial for all parties involved. So I would say that's, a continuous learning experience. And then moving into the work, globally with an international partner, I would say for me, one of the biggest learnings that I had is, continue to have, is just how valuable this type of work is for students. It can be really hard, and when you're spending your breaks traveling to Uganda, and I have 3 kids at home, right, and sometimes you're a little like, oh, this is a lot, right? Because you come back and it's not like you had a chance to rest or get your inbox cleaned up, right? You just start, you're back to class, and and you're in the wrong time zone, and but I would say what keeps me engaged with this work is I really do feel like it's a calling, that, it's a privilege, and the fact that we're at an academic institution that really embraces this type of learning and providing these experiences for students. I think that, it's the onus is on me, and it's almost like it's providential that these things came together in the way that they did, and that this is my way to, to help provide unique experiences for students. And I would say, the fact that I've had the pleasure of being involved in this project now for 5 years, that I still talk with and meet regularly with any student that, has been engaged in this work. This has become a part of their story, and they continue to mentor students that are working on the projects now. We ended up creating a foundation for the school in Uganda, and so that's being staffed by 5 students that graduated a few years ago, and so now they're running a foundation to have kind of a separate way of supporting the school. So it really becomes just a part of the identity of our Notre Dame students that have been involved in this work. And one of my favorite stories, one of the students, Grace, who was, one of our top finance students. We have, a phenomenal undergraduate finance program, but she got involved in this through innovation and design. She had an opportunity to travel, and then she went back before she started her, investment banking job, and spent a month in Uganda training the faculty and staff there on, how to manage their finances and keep the books, and, continues to work and support the school, even now. And so she works very long hours in her role in the financial sector, but still makes time for doing this type of work. And it's become just such a core part of who she is. So I think that's to sum up my takeaways, is that, we have just an incredible student body, and they love doing impactful work and making a difference. And again, this type of project might not be the right fit for every student here, right? But for those that are, it's really an honor to be able to help make those connections for them to get involved and do this type of high impact work.
So if you're a faculty member who's listening to this and you're inspired to do something like this, but of course, maybe you want to sort of jump right into, something like this extensive, what would you say? You have sort of local partners you've worked with in the past. Someone wants to sort of get started in this, thinking about how would they do something like this in their own course. Where would they start? What are the first steps they would have to take to think about building up some kind of experience like this into their courses?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would say, as we've thought about even the future of our program and how we ensure that we're accessible to students that want to do this type of work, right? We've been thinking about, what are other project partners that we can continue to support beyond just our school in Uganda. And as we think about that, we think what are kind of shorter micro engagements that you can have students, do this type of work. And it can be tricky for some, right? If you have the opportunity to turn it into a classroom project, I think that's great. And then it can be something that you're working on over the course of semester, or even, as I began our talk today, Jim, the consulting class, we just did, shorter engagements. They were 2-week sprints, and you're just constantly, looking at different, projects and opportunities. But some of the other things that we've been exploring are, what does this look like if you're doing a project just over one of the breaks, right? You could do like a full 1 credit or 1.5 credit course over a fall break or spring break or a Maymester, right at, when the semester ends, where you're engaging in this type of work, just beyond the classroom, but it gives students that opportunity for doing this type of work, and kind of gives you a little bit more flexibility in how you're delivering it and ensuring that you're meeting, the standards for what you want to deliver in the time frame that you have.
Yeah, I would add 2 pieces of advice, because I've done this work myself, is that, first of all, the campus itself can sometimes offer partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
There may be organizations on campus itself that you can work with directly, for example, like health services, or for things like student mental health services. Another way to think about it. These possibilities exist on the campus itself, especially like a larger campus. The thing I would say for faculty members is think about what you care about in your own community. And like when I did, it was an organization I was a board member on. And so it helped me see that I knew that organization needed certain things because I was a board member.
Yeah.
And so I was able to help my class find the ways that would help that organization. So faculty members might think about what they're already involved with,
Mm-hmm.
and how could they help support the things they already care about, right? It sounds like that was true for you also, because you found out about this organization, and you sort of thought, okay, let's figure out how we can help these folks in Uganda.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Yeah. So I think, leaning into what you know and whatever partnerships already exist within the university is a great approach.
I'm sure that students will remember this class as one of their highlights of their college career. So thanks so much for helping us think about creative possibilities for teaching, not only with community engagement, but also a virtual reality. That's fascinating stuff. And so thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Designed for Learning is a production of Notre Dame Learning at the University of Notre Dame. For more, visit our website at learning.nd.edu.